being a teenager and struggling myself with some anxiety and depression. Back then we didn't have, I guess, the education that we all have now. It's not as out there. But I always knew that I wanted to go see a therapist. I ended up seeing a therapist because I was sexually assaulted at a party. My therapist, he's the reason why I went into this field, because I saw the transformation and the tools that she gave me, and she believed in me. I wanted to do that too.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Through Help and Back. We are so happy that you are here on this August 1st. I don't know when you're listening to this, but we're filming this on August 1st. Life is pretty good. We're in the midst of summer. People are staying busy, but we're enjoying the fresh air up here in New England. The skies have cleared. The sunshine is coming down, and so we're all feeling pretty good because we talk a lot on this show about different things that affect mental health, and something that Ian and I experience acutely is the vitamin D deficiency. And up in here in New England, we don't get the sunshine all year long like the rest of you guys do. It's too cold for about 5 or 6 months. So Ian, you're smiling, you're feeling your vitamin D, you're feeling good. You doing okay?
Oh yeah, been running outside, even if there's a little bit of sun.
Yes.
And it's really raining, I still go on a run.
Nice. And Ian is serious about his fitness. He needs his own camera angle. Ian's looking jacked. He's looking like he's had his run and he's got his sunshine. So he's a good motivator for us. And one of the things we talk a lot about, one of the issues that affects mental health, kind of far above the others, it seems like it's in media, it seems like it's in everybody's awareness, is this issue of anxiety. Anxiety can kind of be there as a standalone condition. It can also be present as a symptom and a comorbidity with other symptoms. And it's just something that in the world nowadays, I think everybody is really aware of. Everybody is feeling probably more than they have in the past, with from COVID to Canadian wildfires to technology to social media to everything. We're so busy, our brains are overloaded, and anxiety is at an all-time high. So we like to have experts on that can help us with that, experts in the treatment of anxiety. We have that today with Suzanne Orlando. She is a licensed clinical social worker. And you guys should know we get kind of wrapped up in this alphabet soup stuff, like what's a LSW versus a LISW, LCSW. But a licensed clinical social worker is an independent license. So these are folks who have gone through the training to become a social worker and then even gone above and beyond through their experience and documentation and supervision. So this is the top of the food chain when it comes to social worker licensure, and they don't just give those things away. So Suzanne, we are very happy to have you. Thank you so much for making time for us today.
All right, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Awesome. So where in the world are you? Do you mind sharing? I mean, I don't know how we're doing with confidentiality, but where are you today?
No, it's okay. Yeah, I'm open to share that. So I'm in northern New Jersey. I always like to describe it as I'm about 20 minutes away from New York City.
Nice. And are you from there, or are you new?
I am not new. I was born and raised in New Jersey, about 10 minutes away from where I live right now. So I haven't gone very far.
So you reduct the accent pretty well. So, you have to ask if you're transplant, you know what I mean? So I don't know if I'd peg you from New Jersey right off the bat. So that's great. So what was it like? How was life, in New Jersey growing up? I mean, things were good and you liked it enough to stay there, I guess. So.
Yeah, things were good. It was, suburban life in the 80s, early 80s, so.
Yes.
Out on the streets till the streetlights came on, drank the hose water because you weren't allowed inside.
Yeah, that's
you
right.
kind of figured things out on your own. Different time,
Did you go through the big hair? Did you have the big hair going?
You know what? It's so funny that you say that, because in the town that I grew up in, the town surrounding it, there was tons of big hair. My town wasn't so much the big hair, and the people that did have the big hair were kind of shunned away. But I also kind of wasn't a conformist either. My town was very preppy, very Gap, very Britches. If I know I'm dating myself with these stores,
no, it's
but
good.
Very plaid in my town, not the punky, that kind of cool plaid, the other kind of plaid anyway. But I kind of beat to my own drum and was more of at the time, I guess it wasn't as extreme as it is now, but kind of the gothy, punky, edgy kind of teen. That was me. I didn't like to conform to what everybody else was doing.
I think that's the best. I think that's the best childhood to have, right? You're kind of doing your own thing. You're finding your own way. You're striving for independence. I wonder, those people who kind of just fell in line and did the conformity thing, their stories probably aren't as good. You know what I mean? It's
agreed.
Yeah, I was doing what everybody else was doing. Well, there's not much else to talk about then, So that's cool. So tell me a little bit, taking it way back, what got you interested in social work in the first place, and why did you gravitate to the helping professions? What inspired you there?
Yeah, that's such an awesome question. So it does go back to my being a teenager and, just struggling myself with some anxiety and depression, which I kind of didn't really know what that was. I knew what it was, but not so much at the time. Back then, we didn't have, I guess, the education that we all have now. It's not as out there. But I always knew that I wanted to go see a therapist. And part of my story, which is always important for me to share, is I ended up seeing a therapist because I was sexually assaulted at a party. And my friend at the time, one of my male friends at the time who was throwing the party, who I had only known for a short while, and the person who assaulted me had known him for quite a number of years. When it kind of came out what happened, the friend that I had only known for a short while believed me immediately and questioned his friend. His friend admitted what had happened, and he basically kicked his friend out of his life at that point. And he then looked at me. He got on the phone with his therapist and asked his therapist what he needed to do to help me and to support me. And then he invited me to go to his next therapy session so that I could meet his therapist and kind of process and talk about what happened to me.
Okay, and this, I mean, this is like, and this friend is a senator of what state? Like, this is like the most
right?
put together, mature, teenage interaction I've ever seen. So by the book, what a great job by that young man. That's an amazing story. I mean,
and it's also something we don't hear a lot of things like that happen, right? And I at the time, I think I was 18 years old. I was a senior in high school. He was a little bit older. He was 19. But had the wherewithal to do that. So the story goes, I met his therapist. His therapist then became my therapist. I went there because of a purpose, because I was trying to process this assault that happened. And as I continued to see her, unpacked other things that had been going on in my life and recognized that there was depression and anxiety that I was struggling with. And as I began to work with her and see, kind of start to trust the process with her and start to see my own transformation, which I for the purposes of the audience, I'm kind of fast forwarding through this story, but it did take a long time, several years of intense therapy and to go through all of this process. I know I'm all over the place. Going back a little bit.
Go for it.
Yeah. As a kid, in high school, I didn't really love school. My parents were both teachers. I was an average student, if that. Some things I struggled in, but school wasn't my favorite. And I had some creative outlets, but wasn't creative enough to go to an art related school. Right. So I kind of struggled on my confidence in what I was able to do. And one thing that stuck with me was this therapist, and I do get emotional. I'm a crier, so I'm just going to put that out there.
You're allowed.
Every single time I tell this story, right? So as I'm sitting here, as I'm going to therapy every week, as I'm getting to know this incredible woman in front of me, I would always say to myself in the back of my mind, I was like, oh God, I would love to do what she does. I would love to be in her position. But I didn't think I could because I was an average student. I thought you had to be super smart and have all of this, academic knowledge. So I kind of put that on the shelf. I explored other avenues. I went to college. I tried to get into some other things, but it didn't really work out for me. I was struggling with a lot of other things at that time too, mental health wise. So to kind of fast forward and get to the point of this story, I ended up dropping out of school because it just wasn't for what I was studying. Wasn't for me. I was studying fashion, merchandising. I wanted to do fashion design, but as I described, the artistic brain up here, but not on paper. So that kind of didn't sit well with me, just doing from a marketing perspective, doing fashion. So I ended up dropping out. I ended up going back to college after I met my boyfriend, who's now my husband. He had just graduated college, and I was talking to him about how I would love to go to school for psychology. I would love to go to school because I want to do what my therapist did. Her name is Jill. I want to do what Jill does, but I don't think I can. And he kind of encouraged me to just take some classes. So I started taking some classes in psychology, ended up graduating with a degree in psychology, because when I started taking those classes, it came really easy to me because I was so interested in it. I kind of knew it from I kind of knew some of the stuff from my own journey, but it was something that I really wanted to do and I was interested in. So I did that. And then after I did that, I ended up applying to graduate school because I wanted to go for my master's in social work. And I ended up going to New York University, which is for clinical social work, it's one of the best schools that you could go to. And part of the story also, when I was in high school doing the whole college application thing, I remember having a conversation with my guidance counselor. My SAT scores sucked. I totally tanked the SATs. And I remember her saying to me, again, different time, she kind of encouraged me not to go to college based on my SAT scores. So this whole process, so here I am, this kid who was lost. I finally found something that I was interested in, got my bachelor's degree and applied to NYU and got accepted. And had I listened to that guidance counselor,
right,
none of this would have happened. So ended up going for my master's degree. And then through the process of that all, ended up getting licensed and I guess here I am. But the key to this story that I always love to share, because this is so unique in the field that I'm in, is I talked about Jill. And she's my therapist, and she's the reason why, why I went into this field, or why I wanted to be a therapist, because I saw the transformation and the tools that she gave me to encourage me to shift and change. And she believed in me. I wanted to do that too. So through this whole process, I was seeing her here and there off and on, but we maintained a connection. Now, I also want to say that therapist-client relationships, there's a lot there that comes with that. That's usually not something that happens for so many different reasons. But based on what I was doing and what I was studying, she had said to me, kind of joking around, because we had developed a different kind of connection, weren't really client therapists anymore. And she was like, oh, one day, once you get your degree or once you're going for your licensing hours, we'll work together. Like totally joking, like laughing. But really, she was super proud of where I've come and what I was doing. So lo and behold, once I received my license, or as I was going for my clinical hours, she reached out to me and she's like, hey, I'm starting this practice with 2 other psychiatrists. I'm looking for people to come in and do intakes and assessments. And I know you're going for your hours. What if you came in, I supervised you, and I really taught you how to assess and diagnose people. So I started working with her in that capacity, which really was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Because the interesting thing is when you're going for your licensure and you're going for supervision is a little different than therapy, but you essentially have to unpack all of your stuff that comes up when you're working with clients in supervision. Jill already knew everything. So that was a great process. And then when I got my license, I was working for a psychiatrist. I ended up leaving that psychiatrist for many reasons when I got pregnant with my daughter. And around the time that I was, pregnant with my daughter, getting ready to have her, Jill reached out to me because I was fully licensed. And she said, listen, she goes, I'm branching out on my own for the first time. And I'm looking for people to work with me in my practice. And I can't think of anybody that I would want to work with me more than I would want you to work with me. So she offered me a position to work with her. So that was in 2010. And this is where I am now.
Wow.
So,
wow.
So she and I have been working together for a very long time. I've known her since I was 18. I know her son is 20. I knew him since the time he was born. She knows my kids. It's a very cool, unusual full circle story, but I think it's a really important part of my journey to share.
No, it's clearly central. It's a central figure, right, to your story, because the thing that stands out to me, there's a couple of things, by the way, and thank you for sharing all of that, because, sometimes you get the oh, well, I always want to help people, and then they move on. But this is highly personal and very real for you, and you had a great mentor and a great guide. But one of the things I'm most struck with is on the heels of your trust in other people probably getting obliterated as a result of this sexual assault. I'm imagining, younger, finding her way. You said there was some baseline insecurity and anxiety to begin with. Where do I fit? Grew up in a nice area with teachers as parents, but I'm kind of a rebel. So you're kind of like trying to find your own way. And then this young man, rips trust away from you, and something I'm sure was very traumatic and took a long time to recover from. But on the heels of that, you meet this person who you probably can trust as much, if not more, than anybody else in your life, as a direct result of that event. And so I just think I'm always so struck by the duality in life and the two sides to this, right? Like from our worst experiences can come our best experiences, and it looks like that actually happened for you. So how amazing.
Yeah. And I love that you say that way, Jason. I think of that a lot when, it's because it's true, these things that happen to us and I always struggle with when I say this or think this, even all these years later, there's that saying, things don't happen to us, they happen for us. And even something as traumatic as a sexual assault, if really like that was the almost one of the first steps, if that didn't occur, if I didn't go through that trauma, I might not be here speaking to you today. And it's kind of, in a way, it's like messed up when we think about it that way or talk about it. But I do think it's also reality because listen, these are the things in life that happen that we aren't expecting or anticipating, but they do set us up for other things.
Regardless of what you believe about the universe, we're on a path, right? And we don't know where these twists and turns are leading us. And Steve Jobs had that famous statement about you can never understand your life looking forward. You can only understand it looking backwards, right? Looking backwards, all the pieces fit. And I'm well familiar with that myself. I mean, not to get into too much detail, because we can only have one person cry per show, so I don't want to cry. So I'm just going to...
I will again.
I can't wait. Yeah. Wait till you hear this follow-up question. No. So we experienced some family loss in my family, right? And, long story short, as a result of that, it ended up leading me moving to Texas, right? And I went to TCU, and that's where I did all my grad studies and, my sort of secondary education, if you will. And I can remember being very young, having just lost a family member, being in Texas, being alone, and be like, what is going on? What's happening to me? Right. You get into that mindset and very nervous, very anxious and unfamiliar. I grew up in Ohio. Texas is very different from Ohio in a lot of ways, and so, but, fast forward 12 years, I have my wife, I have 2 children, I have this career, I meet these educational mentors that have guided me through that process. And those experiences really laid the foundation for everything I did since then. And literally without that loss, I don't have the 2 children that I have today. Right. I don't have the wife that I have today. And so it's often very important, even in the midst of like the biggest storms, to remain trusting and to remain patient. Right. Because it doesn't make any sense right now. And it's okay. It doesn't make sense right now. But if you have that fundamental belief that this is for a purpose, you can survive. You can survive and you can thrive, and that seems like that's what you've done. You've, on the heels of that horrible event, you're thriving in a lot of ways. And it's amazing.
True. It's that saying, trust the process. And when we're in it, I'm sure no one wants to hear that. And everyone wants to punch you in the face when you say that.
Sure.
It's true. You have to trust the process because there's a reason. And as you said, it'll make sense going backwards.
And I'm sure if we'd had this talk with you at 18 years old, because I assume, is that when you were 18 when the assault happened? It probably wouldn't have resonated and it probably wouldn't have made a lot of sense at 18, right?
Not at all.
So not to get, too nitty gritty with it, but we're talking about your recovery process. But that 18-year-old having gone through that, trauma is a highly individual experience. But I think universally, sexual assault is one of those things that people are like, oh yeah, that counts. That's in the club. Like that's traumatic. So what was that? What was that like? Who were you after that event? What did that set off for you that you talk about doing the work of repair? What did you have to rebuild? What kind of damage was done as a result of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's super important because there are people who go through that and will continue to go through that, unfortunately. I think one of the things is just feeling just so vulnerable in every capacity without even knowing why. So I remember I was a senior in high school. So I remember even like the following week going into school. And I remember there was one time where I was standing in the middle of the hall, the classes were changing. There were a lot of kids in the hallway. And I was not somebody, I was like anxious, but I was never panicky before that. I never had anything like that happen. And I remember just standing there feeling like just so overwhelmed and so unsafe by all the people in the hallway and all the noise in the hallway. And I remember just standing there frozen. And one of my friends saw what was happening. She knew what I had been through, and she grabbed me and she goes, "We're going to my house right now." And she just took me out of the school. And her mom was there, and she's like, "Don't worry about, like, we'll figure it out. Don't worry about like missing classes or whatever." She just got me the hell out of there. And I think that was something that would occur frequently thereafter as I was working through the process in therapy. But I think having those panic related symptoms where feeling trapped, feeling like I can't get out of something, feeling overwhelmed, feeling frozen, really, I think is what it is not having that, when our anxiety, when those hormones start to kick in, when those chemicals start to kick in our brains, it's the fight, flight, or freeze response. And I reacted with the freeze response in that moment when the assault was happening. And then thereafter, whenever things like that would occur, crowded hallways, crowded spaces, loud noises, that was something that was really hard to get through.
That's got to be an incredibly difficult thing, because if that's your response during the event, and then that's your response to otherwise what used to be safe, right? Like if danger comes from a place of safety, then how do you ever really feel safe again, right? Because you thought this was safe and then you ended up in danger. But if your physical response mirrored that in the event, you're literally re-experiencing the event every time, right? Because your body's doing the exact same thing it did during that time.
Yeah. And I think that if had my friend not gotten on the phone with his therapist and I remember him scheduling the appointment and picking me up from school and taking me to see his therapist. It happened within a few days of that assault. So I think had it not happened that quickly, I think things might have emerged differently. But I think timing wise, we almost caught it where I was able to process it almost immediately after it happened so that I could start to work through what I needed to work through with my therapist.
Was there legal involvement? Was there other, because I've heard that can be as traumatic as the event,
So again, part of the story, it was a different time. I always say I'm so grateful that I was 18 when this happened. I did not speak about this to my parents. I did not. My brother knew. I have an older brother. He knew. We did not speak about it to my parents. Even going to therapy, I told my mom I wanted to go to therapy because I just was feeling off. And my mom's like, "That's great. If you want to go to therapy, as long as you're talking to someone, it doesn't matter if it's not me. It's okay that you're going." So but she didn't really know why.
Yeah.
So no, I didn't go through the legal process because then in my mind, I thought, oh my gosh, if my parents knew what happened, somehow they're going to blame me. Somehow it's going to be my fault. They're going to be disappointed in me. So I just chose to not say anything to them. And because of my age, I didn't have to. But I will say that many years later, I think it probably was not until I was 21 or 22, I did bring my mom into a therapy session to disclose that to her. So I did share that with her eventually, but it took me a very long time to be able to do that.
That had to be so hard on mom, you know what I mean, to hear that. And you were probably in a better place, several years, but then,
yes.
But now she gets to start all over, right, with the new knowledge. And
right.
Amazing that you were able to do it. And that's great. And that's part of the healing process, but that's also very tough. It's one of those parents' worst fears,
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. How do you think, because I've talked to quite a few people that, that have had personal experience in the field in which they work, and they have a certain opinion about it. And then I have kind of the other school of thought, other folks that are sort of like, nope, like I'm the professional, like we keep it a blank slate. It's not about me. So how does your personal experience inform your work? And do you think it's been a benefit, or do you think it's been more of a challenge?
Yeah, that's a great question, because certainly I have had clients come through who have had similar experiences. So, of course, keeping with the professionalism, things don't, primarily with things like that. Like when we go through this work and as you become a seasoned, psychotherapist, there is room, there are places for disclosure, but this is not a place for disclosure. And I think that this particular situation, would not warrant that. But when clients have come forward to me, I think on one hand, it certainly doesn't trigger me the way it took me, like, I was 18 years old. And by the time I was licensed and able to start practicing, I think I was, how old was I? Like 29, 30. So I had really processed and worked through it, so things wouldn't trigger me. However, when clients do share things, especially on this topic, I am not a blank slate when I work with my clients. I'm not exposing my own personal things, but I think I'm a human being. So if I'm sitting with a client and they're telling me something that has happened to them traumatically, I'm there with them, in the room with them. I am expressive to them. I am showing my empathy. And it's real, genuine empathy. There's been times where clients have shared different circumstances, and there's been a couple of tears that well up in my eyes. And on one hand, you can't be like a ball of mush. You can't be like ugly crying hysterically. But I think showing your eyes getting watery you're also modeling for your client that, hey, I'm a human being, and it's okay to be emotional. It's okay to express yourself. It's okay to feel what you're feeling when you're feeling it. So I think that lends itself to, because of the experiences that I've gone through with the assault and otherwise, just in my journey with mental health, I think it allows me a different capacity in which to connect with my clients. And they don't know my story. They might now through this podcast, but they don't know. Yeah. They don't know, the story in the room. They just see me as somebody who hears them and sees them for who they are in that moment without judgment.
When I was struggling with anxiety and having panic attacks, I was actually practicing when that happened. I was actually sort of the opposite, where I was kind of a straight line until I got into practice. And, and it was all, looking back on it, it was a lot of things. It was physical health. I mean, one of the things I've shared on the show is that sleep was a big deal for me. My sleep was a wreck, and that caused a big part of the problem. But there was also, new babies running around. There were, PhD programs. There were, job interests. So there was a lot going on. But I always struggle with that at the beginning. Like, I think at the beginning, it was almost like playing pretend. Like, I wanted the clients to feel like, nope, I had it all together, and you can trust me with this because I'm an expert, and, I'm the lifeguard. I could never drown myself. I'm the best swimmer in the room. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it was actually with my work through addictions where people really connected. When you're working with addicts, one of the first things they want to know is, are you an addict? Right. And if you're not, or haven't had experience with that, it's actually a barrier to overcome, because there's a sense of like, you'll never understand what I'm really going through. And so working with them kind of opened my eyes to the fact that, you know what, when done appropriately and in the right context and not forced, self-disclosure has actually been one of the greatest kind of like, connectors to rapport and then leapfrogs to progress. Because there's also the implication of, wow, Suzanne went through this and she's, in private practice and she's independently licensed. She has a career. So if she went through it and could flourish, I can as well. So I agree with you. Timing's everything in this business. And that's why I say it's
100%.
It's an art, not a science. It's all touch and feel and timing. Before we go on, I want to say a few words about Iann Behavioral Health. Iann Behavioral Health is an outpatient provider of mental health and substance abuse services in Ohio and New Hampshire. That means that Iann can successfully treat mental health and substance abuse issues or dual diagnosis if you're struggling with both. Their integrated approach allows for them to successfully address issues related to anxiety, depression, addiction, trauma, and really anything that stands between your life and the life you could be living. You really cannot bring them an issue that they have not successfully treated. They have also solved one of the biggest problems for people seeking help. They have a dedicated team waiting to hear from you at helpnow@iannbh.com. If you contact them today, within 24 hours, you will have heard back from, wait for this, a real live person, and will also have your first appointment scheduled at that time. So how do you contact them? Well, if you're in Ohio or New Hampshire, you're probably close to one of their local locations. You're welcome to go in. If not, you can always reach them online at annewbh.com. And if you're interested in services for you or loved one, use that address, helpnow@annewbh.com. Another part of your story that really stood out to me was this idea of probably a very well-meaning school counselor, school therapist telling you that maybe like college isn't for you. I think a lot about identity and how we tell ourselves stories about ourselves, what we can and can't do, and how we sort of live up or down to our labels. So to that, like that therapist or that counselor, did he or she kind of feed into a pre-existing kind of sense of doubt? Did that really knock you back? Like, what was the impact of that message.
Growing up in the area that I grew up, and I know a lot of this is true today too, like I'm air quoting it, you're supposed to go to college after you graduate high school.
We had
like
that too. Yep.
Right? That's the line. You have to that's what you're supposed to do. And I think I knew that, but on one hand, I never really connected with this woman. She was much older. She was probably close to retirement age at this time. And I didn't really have a connection to her other than this is your schedule for the year, or this is the class you need. Very, not no depth at all. But I think when she said that to me, having been somebody who wasn't the best student, average, kind of struggled in some things, I did what I was supposed to do. As much as I thought I was a rebel, I was a rule follower too. It kind of just like, I was like, oh, that kind of sucks, I guess. Yeah, maybe I can't do the things that I thought I wanted to do, or maybe I won't do well in college. And maybe, I think even if it wasn't on the surface, I think it fed the subconscious story that I had about myself and what I could and couldn't do. I really do believe that was part of it.
I've worked with kids, teenagers, and even younger, and I know you do as well. And I just think that labels and judgment are you just got to really stay away from them, because it can be innocent coming from the adult, or you may think it means one thing in a certain context. But I think when children are in that stage of brain development, they are like looking for that stuff, right? And they're so sensitive and overly reactive to any kind of label that's put upon them, but it can also stick. Right. And they can come to believe that about themselves. So I don't know, just a thought when I think about all those teenagers, like, just be careful. Any labeling or any perceived judgment is just like, even something as simple as, oh my gosh, why would you do that? It's like, boom, right? Because now you're judging me, and now I feel something about that. And, the amygdala goes crazy, and, here come all the emotions. And so it's just interesting, because a lot of your story is just these ripples, these things that happened to you young, and now they've rippled and kind of echoed throughout your life. And so it just speaks to the impact of our interactions with young people. Just be careful. I mean, it does. And on the positive side, from a solution focused standpoint, if you believe in somebody, if you prescribe some positive labeling, you may set them off on a trajectory of living up to those labels and change their life in a positive way. So was it mostly Jill that did that for you? She was the one that kind of helped you recalibrate and talk about what was possible, or did you have other supports?
She did. I mean, I think, just giving them some credit, of course, as well. My parents always were supportive of me, I think, but they were also very much of the generation of, go to college, you do this is what you do. You have to have a job. You have to sustain yourself. You can't do these like creative things that aren't going to pay the bills. Like you have to. So I think they were supportive through all of my different things that I wanted to do. But I think in terms of just being really supportive, because I was open with Jill. She knew she knew me better. She knew me the same I knew myself. Like I would tell her things that I wouldn't tell anybody. And she helped me through so many different things. So yeah, I think she was probably my biggest supporter at that time.
So thinking about people who are shopping for therapists and thinking about therapists who are wanting better rapport with their clients, what was it about Jill that made it easy for you to connect? How was she able to create a relationship that you could trust like that?
So I think initially, and I think this is true for adults too, but especially a teenager who's going to a therapist. I wanted to go to a therapist, so that was different. But I think her vibe, outward vibe, and also just how she spoke to me, and also how she sat. Like these are all the things that we think about. Like I remember her, and at the time, okay, this is 1993. So you got to remember just, I guess, how a professional may have dressed in 1993 versus now, right? We're a little more casual, but I remember her coming, the office, there was like a staircase. I remember her coming down the stairs to the waiting room, and she's wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and she's got this like funky jewelry on, and she has motorcycle boots on. And I'm like, this chick looks really freaking cool. So then we go upstairs, and she sits in like this, like, it looked like living room furniture. I guess I was picturing the couch and a stiff chair and, what we come to think about therapists to have in their office. No, she sat across from me. I think she bent her knee up, and she just kind of like rested her hand on her knee. And she's just like, all right, and she was just talking to me like I was talking to one of my friends. And she wasn't stuffy. She didn't have a clipboard. I mean, she might've taken some notes because it was our first time, but she was very casual. She was listening to me. She was having a conversation with me. She didn't, I guess I pictured some stuffy therapist who was like near retirement age, who was going to be judgy, looking at me off from looking over her glasses or something. But she was, her vibe was very, very chill, very warm, very open, and not judgmental at all. So I felt connected immediately. She also shared, again, we talked about disclosure. She wasn't, and her strategy, she probably saw me and saw probably how I was dressed at the time. And she was like, oh yeah, she goes, I remember her telling me that I'm a musician too. I'm an artist. I think she had her guitar in the office too.
Very cool.
So I was like, oh my God, this woman is freaking amazing. So there were so many ways that I connected to her on that level. And then as we began to do the therapy, again, I think it was because it was the first time that I felt heard and I felt seen and I felt not judged. I was able to speak freely. And even if I had a difficult time talking or sharing, she was able to encourage me to speak without me feeling afraid or judged. I felt really held. I guess that's the therapist term, but I felt very held in her office. And I don't know that I had ever felt that in any other place before.
It was a safe space before we started calling them that, right? It was your safe space. And I think that's so crucial because I had an early experience where I was working in a recovery, capacity, and it was the same sort of thing. Like I had degrees and stuff, and I was going to be an expert. And so I used to wear a suit like every day. I'd have suits on, and I was really struggling. And I'm like, I'm a pretty nice guy. I don't understand why I'm struggling to connect with these guys. And so I'm one of these kind of like, let's just call out the elephant in the room kind of thing. And so I started asking, like, look, I know you're not feeling me. Like, why? What happened? I'm here to help. What can I do better? And it was like, well, look, you're wearing a suit, so we think you work for the cops, right? Like they thought I was a probation officer, right? That's who wears a suit.
Makes sense.
And so it's like good feedback. And so, yeah, the jeans and the boots and that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of evidence around that. But I think even more today with like online and telehealth and distance and COVID, I think people are really desperate for opportunities to connect. You know what I mean? And so I think it's incumbent upon us as the professionals to make that warm, welcoming environment. You don't have to pretend to play guitar, although Jill sounds cool as hell, and I kind of want to hang out in her office too. Like it sounds like a really cool place. But like bring your authentic self. Have some personal pictures, warm it up a little bit. If you have to ditch the tie or loosen it up, because I don't think people are getting as much natural connection in their day to day. And so when they get into our space, they're really like, I hope I can connect here, and I hope there's an opportunity to connect. And we may have to role model that because I don't think it's happening as much as it used to. In the 90s, if people met out, you better connect with them and get a phone number right then because there was no social media. There was no
That's
Instagram
right.
and Snapchat. You better learn how to talk to somebody real fast, because you got one shot while you're walking around the mall, and then they're gone.
That's true.
Forever.
That's right. Then they're gone forever. You can't look them up. That's so true. How did we survive? We did though. We got through it.
I think we learned how to close real fast. I mean, there was definitely shyness and awkwardness, but I mean, you got to the point and you learned how to close a deal or learned how to connect real fast, or else that was it. Because we're in the same generation. Like I can remember even like people getting a friend or a boyfriend or girlfriend from a different high school. You're like, how did you do that? You're a wizard. That's like a whole nother world. You know what I mean?
That was the mall right there. And you're like, can I have your phone number? Like you have to like go up and ask somebody or just be courageous.
What are you doing here? Yeah, the courage. Yeah, I think that's it, right? And it sounds funny and whimsical right now, but you took some beatings, right? Because you could like ask and somebody could be like, no. Like they're going to let you know right then they're not feeling you, right? Because they don't have time to waste either. So I don't know. We sound very old right now and we're like yearning for...
We do, but we're not.
We're yearning for the simpler times. But I do think there was a benefit to that. And I do think it's created a connection gap. I worry about that with people, these instant gratifications and the cheap dopamine and not having to develop the connection skills around that to earn it. It's tough. So, okay. So we've got your background. We understand clearly why you're involved in this and, helpers, hurt people, right? So like help people, you're out helping. What does your practice look like? Who are you working with and what are the issues that you're seeing a lot of and you're working with on a day-to-day basis?
most of my clients fall within the ages of probably 11 all the way up through maybe like in their 60s. A lot of majority is anxiety in one way, shape, or form. Lots of anxiety, depression. There's under the umbrella of anxiety. I have clients who have, true OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. I work with historically. I don't see it so much anymore. I'm going to knock on wood here, but there was a long time where almost every client who came through my door, mostly adolescents, were engaging in some form of self-injury. Cutting was the primary thing. And I kind of fell into that also, which I love. And I still do. I love working with clients who are experiencing that. I have I feel very connected when clients are there because I do understand it on a very deep level and am able to help clients work through that. Clients who are, I have a lot of experience working with clients who have suicidal ideation. I do couples therapy, and I do equine assisted psychotherapy too. Not in my office because horses are not here, but over down the block there's a wild Mustang rescue that I'm connected to where I do equine assisted psychotherapy.
When you say you connect to the cutting, was that part of your healing as well? Like you engaged in that?
It was, yeah. It was something that I found to be a maladaptive coping strategy during that whole process.
So did that start after the event? Like you had none of that before and then that was after?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. You said maladaptive coping mechanism. I bet you at the time it was just a coping mechanism. And now...
It was just a coping mechanism. I think Jill called it that, but I don't think society called it that at that time.
A maladaptive coping mechanism?
Or they didn't even call it a coping mechanism. I think a lot of people didn't understand it to the capacity that they do today.
Ian's got a comment. What'd you say?
What does that mean?
Sure. So basically, it's a way to deal with what's going on with you emotionally. But we say it's maladaptive because it's not the healthiest form of dealing with the struggle that you're going through.
So think about addiction, right? So drinking, right? Because to deal with your stress, it's a coping mechanism in the sense that you feel better when you're drinking. It's maladaptive in the sense that it creates, the disease of addiction. It can lead to like liver failure. You lose your job. So it's basically coping mechanisms with a dark side, right? Is the way to think about it.
Doesn't that apply for all coping mechanisms? Like imagine if we can walk around and not have to cope and just, we can not look at the pain as a problem somehow.
So that one I would tackle, and I would say, yes, there are a lot of coping mechanisms that are not maladaptive because there's not a downside to a lot of coping mechanisms, right? There are things like anything that increases your ability to flourish or increases your survival rate is pro-social, right? Is kind of the word to think about it, right? So instead of taking a drink, if you go for a jog, the jog helps your feelings that you would have drank behind, and you also get healthier. Right. So there's actually some benefits behind that. So that's how I would say, I don't know how you think about it, Suzanne, but that's kind of my line is it promoting health and is it promoting longevity? Is it promoting flourishing or is there a price to pay? That's how I think about it. So when I say coping mechanism, what I want to drill down to is basically it's like if it's a coping mechanism, it worked for you on some level, right?
Yes.
The maladaptive part was revealed later. That's always the trick with maladaptives is like, yeah, you get the benefit now, you get the price, the price is later. So the thing when it comes to cutting, and people always ask, and I'll ask it just kind of very naively, is like, how did that help? Like it seems from the outside looking, if you look at something like, I'm going to cut myself, I'm going to draw blood, I'm going to hurt myself, like cutting yourself to hurt yourself, how can that be helpful? And how was that helpful for you at the time?
That's a great question because that's the go-to. People think, oh, you're hurting yourself, but that's going to hurt. Doesn't it hurt when you do that? So I think and it's personal for everybody, but I think for me, primarily what it was doing is it was a way for me to harm myself because I didn't like who I was. And it was something, physically, I don't remember it hurting me. I remember it happening when I was at beyond the threshold of what I could tolerate. And it was a way for me to release the emotions that I was unable to deal with at the time. And when I did it, it didn't cause me pain. It caused me relief. And just seeing it happen and being in the process of it allowed me to be present in the moment with myself. And then when I was through with the cutting, it gave me a way to breathe and just move forward. And I know that sounds depending on who's listening, it's hard to understand that if you're not in it, but that's how it, I guess in air quotes, that's how it helped me through what I was going through. That's what I do hear that often sometimes from clients I work with. I also hear that sometimes there's such a numbness when it comes to the emotions, especially when we're dealing with deep depression or depression, where some people utilize it to say that, hey, I'm still here and I'm human and I'm literally flesh and blood. And when I do this, I know that I'm still breathing, I'm still living, I'm still here. So there's so many different ways and layers to it. And I think as a therapist, I never assume if somebody's engaging in self-harm, I never assume the experience for them. I always want them to share with me,
of course,
what it's like for them, and in a non-judgmental place, of course.
I was speaking for all those parents who have said that to me, like, how could she do this? How could he do this? It makes no sense. But, and this is not promotional of this at all, but the folks who are engaging in it, they describe it as almost a form of meditation. It's a way to get, in meditation, you're trying to observe your feelings, but not be reactive to them. You're trying to focus on one singular activity or one single focus point, and then accept what's happening around you without all the judgments that we pile on as humans, right? Well, if you think about somebody who is cutting, I mean, they tend to have kits. They tend to have a way that they're doing it. There's a ritual around it, and let's not forget the role of endorphins, right? I mean, I broke my leg in half with like the bone sticking out, and
oh my goodness.
Well, not today. It wasn't today. We're fine. When
But still,
when I was 12, 13, I did that, and I didn't feel a thing. I laid there with a leg that was in goofy pieces, and I would lift up my leg and half of it would lift because it was disconnected, literally. And muscle and tissue was there, but the bones were disconnected. And I was talking to people like I'm talking to you right now. It was what's your mom's phone number? What happened? Oh, no big deal. Now, when I got to the hospital and the endorphins wore off, very different experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in that moment, so think about that on a lower level with cutting, there is also just that physical release. We get locked in on dopamine and serotonin, but your body recognizes that you're hurt, releases those endorphins, and that can have a soothing effect as well. So that's great. Again, thank you for more self-disclosure and sharing. I think it just, because everybody's asked that, why? It's crazy, right?
It's a great question.
It's so crazy. Why would you do that? It's because it worked, and that addict said a lot too. It worked. That's why I did it. And then it didn't work and it became a problem, and I had another problem I had to deal with. But in the short term, it worked, So back to your practice now, the first issue you talked about was anxiety, right? And we're seeing a lot of that in our practice as well. I mean, if I had to choose one thing that kind of defines our world now, anxiety is it feels like to me, I don't have empirical evidence, that feels like the number one thing people are seeking help for. You're nodding, so that's good. So do you have any theories as to why? Why have we seen this explosion in anxiety? What are you hearing from your clients? Why are we seeing so much of this?
I mean, there's so many theories. This could be a whole other conversation, right? I think COVID played a huge role in that. I think just with not knowing where this thing was going, that was huge. And even before that, I think, again, kind of sounding old, but I'll go ahead and do that.
I'm with you.
But I do believe that, with everything that we have with technology and everything that's at our fingertips, and there's always, it's not even what am I doing in the moment? It's what am I doing 30 moments from now? What am I doing next? What am I doing next? What's going on next? What's coming at me? I need to answer this email. I need to answer this phone call. It's this constant running of thoughts in our head that we don't have the capacity to slow down, because there's so much of it coming at us at once. And there's so many demands, and there's so many expectations that we put on ourselves. And even whether it's directly or indirectly, there's just such a demand for our attention in so many different capacities that I think we've really lost the capacity to slow down, to be present, to be okay with doing nothing and being stagnant. I think that that's a huge piece of it. There's so many other layers, but because all of that is happening, and I think it's happened so quickly over the years that all of the sudden, we're in this headspace where we constantly, again, these expectations are coming at us from all angles. And I don't think we've developed the capacity. I don't think we have the capacity to handle it all as human beings. We're not robots. And I think because we don't have that capacity, we think that there's something wrong with us. We think that we should be able to do all of the things, and there's no way we could do all of the things. So I think, if that makes sense,
no, it makes
I think that's
great
a huge
sense.
layer of this, especially with kids and everything that kids have nowadays. I was, I was, not that I was grateful that COVID happened, but I was, in one hand, super grateful that everything was shut down and everybody just had to chill in their homes, because the overscheduling, the demands, especially on these kids, on these teenagers, to be in all of the top level classes, to do all the sports, to do all the activities, to build the resume, to work. I was like, holy crap, finally the world has slowed down. Hopefully it will stay this way, or people just take on one thing, or people slow down and understand that the end of the world is not going to happen if you don't do all the things. Unfortunately, I don't think that happened, but for a moment it did. And I was hoping that that would be the trajectory going forward.
It was like 9/11. Everybody was nice for like 6 months, and then they started being jerks again, right? And then It was that same thing. Everybody sort of slowed down. And I think that's where conscious and conscientious parenting comes in. Like, I think parents are sort of activity-based with their kids. Like, are they doing enough, right? So they've got X amount of like tablet time, X amount of outside time. But like we actually have gotten to the point where we schedule boredom for our kids, and we call it quiet time, right? Like you're gonna have an hour of quiet time. And what does quiet time mean? Whatever you want it to mean. It means go outside. It means, redecorate your room. It means paint a picture. It means read a book. It doesn't mean tablet. It doesn't mean mom and dad are going to entertain you, although sometimes we play games during quiet time. But it's just a way to unplug. And we'll actively have conversations like, are our kids getting enough quiet time, enough downtime? Because coping with boredom is a skill like anything else. And, just having a moment where like all these other things are not even an option for you. And it's so funny because they hate us. Like for the first like 10 minutes, they're like, they're so uncomfortable. And then you come back like a half an hour later and they're building a fort and throwing rocks at it. And they've started to engage that creative part of their brain. So I think adults need more quiet time too.
I think we do too. And I think that's what unglues people, because when they do have that time, they don't know what to do with themselves, or they feel like they have to, okay, I'm going to sit down and watch a movie, but I'm watching a movie and I'm scrolling on my phone at the same time, but I can't pay attention to the movie. I get so the attention span has gone away too, but this all but then this all causes more anxiety.
Yeah. I mean, have you had the experience where your partner's showing you like a TikTok while you're watching a movie?
Oh yeah, of course.
It's like Ian's over there, Ian's groaning, like, what are we doing here? You know what I mean? And what's funny about it is the joke is that like one of the partners, when you just watch a movie, like one of them will like fall asleep, right? But that's because they're so overloaded and their bodies and their adrenal glands are finally getting a break. They've only got one thing to focus on. And so their body goes, here's our chance, boom. And they get some rest. So I know every case is different, of course, right? This is such a loaded question with any therapist. How do you do this? But you're dealing with anxiety a lot. Are there some general tips? Are there general techniques? Like, what are your sort of go-to approaches with that? And how do you start the process with somebody who comes in and just says, hey, I'm having an overload of anxiety. I'm uncomfortable all the time and I need to work on my anxiety. What does that process look like for you?
So I think in general, where I get to with them is when we feel anxious or overwhelmed, any anxiety and any of the uncomfortable feelings that we have that are completely normal, I think our tendency is to bury them, push them away, run from them, not deal with them. And one of the first things I work with my clients on is almost like education and teaching them that we have to get to a point where we accept our feelings for what they are in the moment. I always like to use a little bit of an analogy, or I paint a picture for them. We all have, whether it's a family member or somebody in our lives who's just like really annoying, and we have to give them attention. So whether it's the nosy neighbor that's knocking on the door, or the family member that you see only at specific holidays, and you're like, I can't stand this person, but if I don't sit and talk with them, they're not going to leave me alone. So I say, pretend that your anxiety is like that. If you sit down with your anxiety next to you and you give it a little bit of attention, you're kind of taking control back of the anxiety, and then you can send it away. And then you can say, okay, I've had enough of you right now. You can leave, but I'm going to accept you when you show up. I'm going to give you a little bit of attention and then you can go. So really the acceptance of the anxiety for what it is. And it feels so counterintuitive. It's a process. It's not just something that happens. We don't talk about it and they automatically do it, right? There's strategy behind it. But I think the ability to accept your anxiety in the moment and sit with it and not judge it and just take it for what it is. And understand that a lot of times anxiety is, they're just thoughts that you're having. They might not be truth. Most of the time it's not truth. It's just thoughts. I can observe my thoughts. I can sit with my anxiety. And the goal might be to just sit with the anxiety, even if it's for 30 seconds. And then I'm uncomfortable, then I start doing something else. But if I can accept it for what it is in the moment and start small, that's probably a big step.
And I love that. I love that analogy of something visiting, because I think sometimes we view our symptoms as like traits, like I have anxiety or I am an anxious person, as opposed to I'm experiencing anxiety right now or my anxiety is visiting right now. And with kids, I'll work with feelings almost like they're part of their family, right? Like you have a family of feelings and they come and they visit, but they're not there to stay. Even the good ones, right? Even the ones you wish could stay every day are not there to stay. Happy doesn't live with you every day. Happy comes to visit. So does sad and so does anxious, you know what I mean? And if you can just make that switch to like, I'm having a visiting emotion versus this is like ingrained in who I am and how I'm always going to feel, that brings hope. And that's where all things kind of become possible. So are you big with technique driven as far as like, do you give breathing techniques? Do you give specific guided meditations? Or are you more on the conceptual side with like, let's talk about how to think about your anxiety and then kind of find your way from there? I think there's like a divide where people are kind of like 50-50, you know?
It's a little bit of both, because I think there's room for everything depending on who walks in my door and what they're open to as well. Not everyone's going to be a meditator. Not everybody's going to be, the breathing might not help everybody. They might be more of a, give me the facts or give me the evidence or give me this, I say there's an eclectic blend of all of that I utilize.
Do you have any techniques that are like your go-tos? Do you have anything that you like really like?
In terms of the anxiety, yes, one of my favorite ones is a lot. Let me think. I'll share two. So one is, I always say to people, obviously I'm a therapist, and what we do here is talk a lot about emotions and feelings. But when it comes to anxiety, I want to step away from your emotions and feelings, and I want to talk about your rational mind, because a lot of times, as I shared before, a lot of times our anxiety are just thoughts. And most of the time our anxiety is about stuff that hasn't happened. And if you think about your history, a lot of the things that you were anxious about actually never really happened the way that you thought they were. So let's look at the last time you did, what's the facts and the evidence? What's actually happening? Not what you think is happening, not what you feel is happening. What is actually happening in this moment? Let's look at the rational evidence. And we work on that process. I think that's huge, especially with anxiety, because if I can be rational about it, I can recognize my anxious thoughts as just that.
Are you using RABT? Are you using the rational motive stuff, like the actual ABC techniques and everything?
I don't think I use them exactly, but that's within that framework.
Feels like Albert Ellis when you're talking, like that's what I'm hearing. And they say like ABC, right? So A is the activating event, which we would call a trigger, right? And then B is your belief about that event, right? And then C is the consequence of the belief. So that's where your anxiety really takes root, is in your belief and the consequence of your belief, right? So an activating event could be, the boss sends me an email, says we have to have a talk. Your belief is I'm in trouble. Right? I did something wrong. The consequence of feeling like you did something wrong is that anxiety, right? And so then you work with D, E, and F, which is disputing notions. So instead of thinking I'm in trouble, you think there's an opportunity here. He wants to let me know about that. Now, because you believe there's an opportunity, not I'm in trouble, the effect of that disputing notion is I'm excited and I'm opportunistic about it, right? And then F being the final outcome is that I walk around the rest of the day looking forward to my talk with my boss versus like, panic attack and sweating. So yeah, I hear a lot of rational motive behavioral stuff and what you're doing. So that's good. Yeah, good. You said you had two. Did you want to share another one?
Yeah, the other one is, and you kind of,
I stole it.
You mentioned a while. No, you didn't steal it. You had talked about sleep and how sleep, it's hard to sleep sometimes. So, I think a lot of times, especially with anxiety, we could be completely exhausted. We put our head on the pillow and all of a sudden all the stuff that we didn't think about during the day comes flooding back and our eyes are wide awake and we can't go to sleep. So one of the things I love to use with my clients, I call it controlling your controllables. So I'll say to them, I want you to just brain dump everything that you're thinking about on a piece of paper, every single thing, or sticky notes, either one. And don't judge it, just write it for what it is and write everything down. And then once you write everything down, what are the things that you personally can do something about? Because there's probably a lot of stuff on there that no matter what happens, like you cannot control. And it gives you that ability to eliminate that, right? And then of all the things that you identified you can control, what are the things that require immediate action? Is there time sensitive stuff here? And then cross everything out that isn't time sensitive. And then with that, the list is probably small. What plan can you make to touch those things? How can you create a plan towards those things? So that strategy, I think, does a couple of different things. First of all, and I always like the physical act of writing versus typing.
Yes.
It's very cathartic, right? And it's really difficult to think about 100 things and write at the same time sometimes, right? So I think that exercise is also teaching our thoughts to kind of quiet a little bit. I never say like turn them off. I think of thoughts as a volume knob on a radio. And if it's at a 10, if we get it down to a 9, that's probably a lot improved, right? So we want to turn down the volume on the thoughts. So as I'm writing, the knob on my thoughts is the volume's getting turned down a little bit. And then it gives you that cathartic exercise of writing. Plus you're a little more present in the moment when you're doing that. So I think that's a great strategy. And a lot of my clients who practice this, not when they're feeling overwhelmed and anxious, they practice this when they're more even keeled. When they do have moments where they're completely overwhelmed and consumed by their thoughts, this strategy kind of helps them make a plan and become more, and then sit on the rational side of things too.
And there's some mindfulness elements to that too, right? I mean, that's really layered in there where they're focusing on the here and now and what's in their control, shifts their locus of control. That makes a lot of sense. Suzanne, I feel like, we could go Joe Rogan here and go like 4 hours. Like I really,
we could.
I think this is easy because we've chewed up an hour without even trying.
I know we have.
I do want to be sensitive to time. So let me kind of start landing the plane a little bit here. So if somebody's listening right now, right, and this will be 2 questions in one, they're feeling kind of anxious, or they've been dealing with feelings of anxiety, or they don't even know what to call it. They're just feeling off, right? My first question is, when is it time to reach out to somebody like you and get help? Like, where is that line between like, I'm just having some tough days, and versus like, oh, I need to get some help here? And then the follow-up to that is, once they've made that decision to kind of get help, what are they signing up for? Like, what does it look like when that process starts?
Right. Those are great questions. So I think if we all feel stressed and overwhelmed and anxious in some capacity, but if it's getting to the point where it's hard to focus on anything else and you're constantly feeling that, and it's every day or more days of the week than not, it doesn't hurt to reach out to somebody, not to wait until it gets completely out of control where it's taking over 100%. So I think if you're feeling it more days than not, or more of the day than not, I think that's a time where you could reach out and just do a consultation with somebody. And how to start that process. I think I always like to suggest that people, if you're open to reach out to trusted friends or loved ones, and maybe, people who are seeing somebody or people who could give you a referral, personal references or referrals are really great. But it doesn't hurt if you need to go the route of just kind of trying to figure it out on your own. I think it's important to interview your therapists, make a couple of calls and ask people, how do you work with people? Or do you work in person? Do you work virtually? And it's okay to go and see a couple of different therapists and just to get a feel for them. You can tell a lot by meeting with somebody. And I always say to people, you could meet the most world-renowned published therapist. And if you do not make that human connection, no matter how brilliant they are, the therapy is not going to work.
That's right.
So you really have to meet them, talk to them, let them know, I'm shopping around for a therapist. I want to make sure I connect with the right person. And if a therapist is turned off by that, it's probably not the right one for you. Most therapists would be open to that and welcome that.
No, I said I've said that a couple of times. Like, you will not hurt our feelings. Like, shop around, be an active consumer. You're going to feel it. You're not going to be able to read their bio. I mean, that'll get you started. You're not going to be able to read their informed consent and be like, oh, this is the guy or the girl for me. You know, you're going to have to get in the room or get on the screen, and you'll feel it. You'll know. I mean, it doesn't have to be love at first sight. I mean, you know, if you're okay, give it a couple sessions and let that rapport build. But never hesitate to be like, I want to do something else. It's so common. People think they're going to like hurt the therapist's feelings. They think that they're like not allowed to do it. It's, you know, and that's nice. Like, that's a nice human quality that you're thinking of others, but this process is for you. And so, you know, if you're going to the mechanic and your car is still making that funny noise, you would take it to another shop. You know what I mean? So same thing with your emotions, same thing with how you're feeling. So, okay, good. And then specifically, do you work just in New Jersey, or do you take clients from all over? Like, how do people find you?
I, as a licensed clinical social worker, for psychotherapy, I am only licensed in New Jersey. So I can only see people who are in New Jersey, but I also do anxiety strategy coaching, which is a little different than therapy. It's not clinical work, but because I have the background as a licensed clinical social worker, it gives me a little bit more knowledge in that capacity, so that I can work with people no matter where they are.
All right, you need to join my group here, Suzanne. It's so funny how we have to do the like therapy and coaching game and all that kind of stuff like that.
Yes.
I want national licensure. Like, if you can do therapy in New Jersey, why can you not do therapy anywhere?
I know.
Nothing changes in Wyoming. Nothing changes in New Hampshire. Like, so all the bureaucratic nonsense out there, like, stop it. You got to go to school for 4 years, then you got to go for 2 more years. Then to be an independent license like Suzanne, you've got to do 2 more years of supervision. I mean, everybody has all this massive respect for doctors because they spend 8 to 10 years, and that's great, and we should. Therapists are the same way. They're the same way. And, oh, by the way, we have 24 to 36 hours of continuing education units.
Yes.
So you're not allowed to stop learning. So whoever hears this and has any power, if somebody wants to appoint me as the mental health czar for America for one day, I will get one thing done, and that is national licensure and certification.
That's right. Everyone gets a license. You're like Oprah. You're going to throw it out to everybody, right?
But if you have a license, you get one everywhere. So Suzanne will get 49 licenses the next day because she has New Jersey. She should get everywhere else. It's crazy that we have to have this weird barrier, but I understand that it's there. So Suzanne, thank you so much. Let's do this again. I feel like we have a lot more to talk about.
Yes, we need to.
Let's do a part 2. Are you down for that?
Always.
Okay, good. We are going to put all of your contacts in the show notes below, and we'll make sure we link to your practice and can keep that going. And I do want to, as we wrap up, I do want to give a shout out while we're talking about this national licensure and certification. If you're not in New Hampshire, if you happen to, or not in New Jersey, and you happen to be in New Hampshire or Ohio, a new behavioral health can help you out. Psychiatrists, therapists, counselors, case managers, nurses. Anxiety is a specialty for a new behavioral health because anxiety has to be a specialty for any large agency because we are seeing so much of this. So if you're having those feelings of anxiety and you're in New Jersey, you're going to call Suzanne. But if you're in Ohio, you're in New Hampshire, you're going to reach out to New Behavioral Health, ANEWBH.com. Or if you need more immediate help, helpnow@anewbh.com will get you there. Thanks to Ian once again for driving the bus and for some of his commentary. We always appreciate your help, sir. Dynamite contributions. And final thanks to you, Suzanne. Just appreciate you so much for being here. And again, for you guys make this all happen. You're watching. I say it every episode. Time is your most valuable asset. You could be doing some of these interventions. You could be doing other stuff. You could be out walking in the park. You could be having a panic attack. You could be doing anything, but you chose to spend your time with us, and I hope it was worth it. So thank you very much for doing that. And until next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other. Thanks so much. Hey guys, although Through Help and Back is an excellent podcast with a lot of great ideas, I do want to let you know that in no way is Through Help and Back expected to be perceived as or relied upon in any way as specific medical advice or mental health advice for you personally. The information provided through Help and Back on our website or our podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment that can be provided by your own providers. Do not use our content in lieu of professional advice given by qualified medical professionals, and do not disregard professional medical advice or delay seeking professional advice because of the information you have read on our website, heard on our podcast, or otherwise received from us. Although we love discussing issues related to healthcare, mental health, and addiction, we are not providing direct healthcare, mental health care, medical, or nutrition therapy services. We're not attempting to diagnose, treat, prevent, or cure in any manner whatsoever any physical or psychological ailment, any mental or emotional issue, disease, or condition. We are not giving you specific medical, psychological, or religious advice whatsoever. Please take care of yourself and take care of others as you always seek the advice of your own medical providers and your own mental health providers regarding any questions or concerns you have about your specific health, or before implementing any recommendations or suggestions from us. These are ideas that have worked for other people. We think it's important to share them. We do not guarantee that they will work for you specifically. Do not stop taking any medications without speaking to your physician, nurse practitioner, physician assistant, mental health provider, or any other healthcare or medical professional. And if you have or suspect that you have a medical or mental health issue, contact your own healthcare provider promptly. Also, one last thing, if you know or suspect that you are currently experiencing a crisis, it is absolutely imperative that you seek the advice of your doctor or other emergency healthcare services prior to ever thinking about using our content. We love the conversations. We're glad you're stopping by. We hope you take a lot from the content. But again, for your specific individual medical situation, please always seek quality personal care from your own providers. Do not let this information or this advice stand on its own. Thanks so much for listening.